Hey, welcome to Everyday Economics, a podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, president of the 501c3 nonprofit Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network. You can check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics and podcasts such as this one, please make your tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We're recording this episode on Monday, February 27th, and joining me as always is my friend and colleague, Dr. Orphe Divounguy. He's a PhD economist. Dr. O, I want to jump right into it. Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index. Gosh, it seems like I learn about a new index that I never heard of before every single day. So let me ask you this question. I'm only kidding. I've heard of the PCE, but this kind of data becomes more relevant, maybe more interesting when times aren't so good, that we're looking for answers in different places. You know, as an economist, you look at this stuff all the time. As a civilian out there in the world, I typically don't, and I know a lot of other people don't, and quite a few people have never heard of this. So what is the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index?
It's another measure of prices and inflation. In fact, the core PCE price index is known as the Fed's favorite gauge for inflation. And so what it shows is that prices actually edged up more than expected in January, and that there's still people out there spending. And I guess my question is for a lot of people is, are you spending because you have staying purchasing power, or are you spending on essentials and treading water? At least according to this data, what happened in January was personal consumption expenditures, so consumer spending increased by about 1.1%. So that's even after the adjusting for inflation. And that most of that spending was fueled by an increase in real disposable income. So in January, what these numbers show is that people had more income, and some of that income they chose to spend. But part of that story really is also that there's a large number of government programs, federal, state, and local government programs that adjust to inflation. And part of that increase in income in January was an 8.7% cost of living adjustment for Social Security. And so, so that's not going to be there anymore, right? It's, jumps in January for the year. I don't think that we should look at this data for January and think inflation is reaccelerating. I think disinflation is still very much underway, but that the disinflation, that inflation coming down will take a little bit longer than most people had hoped. And so this January data actually had a crazy effect on the markets, right? So because you saw yields increasing really, really rapidly, and the stock market took a beating.
There's no question. I mean, last week, I felt like I was on a yo-yo. Do you feel that people who have money, or, who have had some kind of an adjustment, like you had referenced either, some sort of a federal or state or
Social Security? Yeah. I mean, local. A lot of these government programs adjust with inflation, right?
Yeah, but do you feel like that it as soon as it comes in, it's going out? I mean, is that your take on the consumer right now?
My take on the consumer, yeah, I've mentioned it briefly on the show before. When you look at Gen Z credit card balances increasing 64% year over year, when you look at all of that TransUnion data, consumers telling you they're pulling back, but they're faced with high inflation, prices are really high, and at the same time, they're faced with interest rates on their credit cards, right? All of that is acting to squeeze the consumer. So I feel like on the income side, the stronger than expected labor market is just barely keeping consumers above water. That's my take. Again, it shows in the TransUnion data that consumers are struggling to keep up with higher prices and higher interest on debt. That little boost they got in January, I think that temporary boost they got in January, had to be spent. It had to be spent on essentials.
From that report, the PCE news release, a couple things that I'm nodding my head, I'm looking at and going, yeah, this jives with my understanding. I mean, what I'm seeing, prices for goods increased 4.7% and prices for services increased 5.7%. The food price thing up 11.1%, energy prices up 9.6%. My view on that is at least. I think that in some cases, these numbers are maybe even not fully telling the tale.
Playing devil's advocate here for the other side, the other economists and observers who think that the inflation is reaccelerating and that consumers are in very good shape. The other side says, well, They spent on there was some retail spending in there. There was some hotels and restaurants spending in there. People who are squeezed don't go out and eat at hotels and restaurants. Do you remember what you did when you were 20, 21 years old in college? You didn't exactly cook at home, did you? I think there's going to be a little bit of some people who are not going to be pulling back right away. I mean, even in the TransUnion Consumer Pulse survey, it showed that older consumers were pulling back, but that younger consumers hadn't pulled back yet. And so you're going to have a little bit of that. And I think what you're seeing is you're going to have people with means continue to spend somewhat, and then people who just don't have it pulling back as much as they can and just trying to stay above water. But even when I say that, people with means are savvy and they tend to save a higher share of their income. And so altogether, we're going to see inflation come down, people spending less because they're really getting squeezed right now.
I appreciate your thoughts as always. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other quality podcasts at americastalking.com.